if you pull up a map of modern Europe today and just, like, look at the cultural fault lines.
Oh, you mean like where the Latin alphabet stops and the Cyrillic alphabet begins?
Yeah, exactly. Or where Roman Catholicism kind of gives way to Eastern Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
You might assume those borders were just drawn by geography.
Right, or maybe by thousands of years of peaceful cultural evolution or something.
Exactly. But you'd be totally wrong. Those lines are actually the scars of this massive, centuries-long geopolitical chess game.
They really are. It's fascinating.
And so for this deep dive, our mission is to really focus on the timeline of the Christianization of the Slavs, but also the historical context behind it. Because it's not just a story about religion.
No, not at all. I mean, it's basically a story of state building and survival.
So, okay, let's set the scene. We're looking at the 6th to 8th centuries. The early Slavs are kind of emerging from prehistory, right?
Yeah, they're expanding really rapidly across Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe.
But they're stepping onto a continent that is already completely dominated by heavy hitters, like
Right.
massive empires.
Right. And to understand the sheer scale of the culture shock here, we have to look at how these early Slavic communities actually functioned before they hit those imperial borders.
Because they were super decentralized.
Totally decentralized. We are talking about these egalitarian, kin-based tribes that didn't have an overarching king or an emperor or anything like that.
And their religion reflected that, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very local, earthy reality. They practiced a polytheistic nature religion. So they had deities like Perun, the god of thunder and war.
Right, the guy chieftains invoked when making treaties.
Exactly. And then you had Veles, the god of the underworld and cattle, who was like a patron of magic. Svarog was a sky god. They worshipped in sacred groves. They did animal sacrifices.
So it's a very cyclical, animistic view of nature.
Yeah.
But from a geopolitical standpoint, the critical vulnerability here isn't their religion.
No, it's that they had no centralized state apparatus and, maybe more importantly, no written language at all.
Which is wild, because if you're expanding into territory bordered by, the Frankish Empire to the west and the Byzantine Empire to the south, lacking a state and a written language is an existential threat.
It's an absolute disaster waiting to happen. You can't raise a unified army. You can't collect taxes efficiently.
You definitely can't engage in complex diplomacy with these huge empires.
Right. So for these Slavic rulers trying to hold their newly acquired territories together, adopting Christianity basically becomes a matter of absolute survival.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's essentially a mechanism to secure political legitimacy, right?
Yeah, and to acquire a writing system. They needed to build a state apparatus before the empires next door just swallowed them whole.
So let's look at the timeline, because the historical record shows this tension totally boiling over in the mid-9th century.
It really catches fire in the 860s, specifically in Great Moravia, which is in Central Europe.
Right. And the Moravian Duke, Rastislav, is feeling a crushing amount of pressure from the Franks at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And the irony is Rastislav was technically already a Christian. Moravia had these Franco-Bavarian clergy operating everywhere within its borders.
But those clerics weren't just there to save souls, right? They were basically agents of Frankish subjugation.
Exactly. They conducted all church business, all legal matters, and administration in Latin.
And if you control the language of administration, you control the country. I mean, if the local Slavic population can't understand a single word of the laws or the tax decrees,
they are completely dependent on those foreign clerics. It's a brilliantly insidious way for the Franks to just maintain a monopoly on power.
So Rastislav realizes he has to break this monopoly. He needs a custom administrative framework where his own people can run the state.
Right. So in 863, he makes this incredibly bold move. He writes to the Byzantine Emperor Michael III.
And he basically asks for a teacher who can explain the faith in the local Slavic language, right? Which effectively means someone to help run the administration.
Yeah, and Byzantium saw this as a flawless geopolitical maneuver. By helping Rastislav, they could project their own influence deep into Central Europe.
Literally right into the backyard of their Frankish rivals. It's genius.
So the emperor sends two highly educated brothers from Thessalonica, Constantine, who later takes the name Cyril, and Methodius.
And these guys were brilliant, right? Scholars, diplomats.
Very esteemed. And because they grew up surrounded by Slavic populations near Thessalonica, they spoke the local dialects perfectly.
But when Cyril gets to work, he runs into this massive technical roadblock.
Right, because the Greek and Latin alphabets simply cannot capture the phonetic reality of the Slavic language.
I always think of this like trying to play a grand piano that's missing a third of its keys. The sounds just literally do not exist in the alphabet.
That's a great analogy. So Cyril doesn't just, borrow letters. He invents a completely novel technology from scratch.
The glagolitic alphabet.
Exactly. He takes elements of Greek uncials.
Wait, uncials, you just mean that formal, rounded uppercase script the monks used in their official manuscripts, right?
Yeah, that formal, highly legible script. Cyril uses that as a baseline, but then he pulls in elements from Hebrew and possibly Armenian.
Oh, wow. To create symbols for the unique Slavic phonemes.
Right, those specific vocal sounds like the Z or sh or she sounds that just don't exist in Greek or Latin.
So he ends up with this alphabet of 38 to 40 characters that's perfectly tailored to the spoken language.
And this breakthrough allowed the brothers to translate the Gospels and the liturgy into what we now call Old Church Slavonic.
Which means almost overnight, they bypassed the Frankish clergy entirely.
Exactly. They started training a whole generation of local Moravian priests who could finally read, write, and administer their own country.
Now, if I'm a Frankish bishop, and my entire political racket depends on my monopoly over Latin, this new alphabet is an absolute disaster. I assume they didn't just take this lying down.
Oh, they retaliated with everything they had. They accused Cyril and Methodius of the three-language heresy.
The three-language heresy.
Yeah, they argued that God could only be worshipped in the three sacred languages supposedly inscribed on the cross: Hebrew, Greek, and Latin.
That is just such a thinly veiled theological argument, masking a desperate power grab.
It really was, but it was serious. The brothers had to travel to Rome in 867 to defend their work directly to Pope Hadrian II.
And they argued that just as God diversified languages at the Tower of Babel, everyone deserved to worship in their native tongue, right?
Yeah, it was a brilliant defense, and amazingly, they win. The Pope officially blesses the Slavic liturgy.
But wait, let's look at the reality on the ground. They have a papal blessing and a shiny new alphabet. Does Moravia just peacefully become an independent Slavic state?
Not at all. The local reality was brutal. Cyril dies in Rome shortly after, and Methodius goes back to Moravia, but he gets relentlessly harassed by the German clergy.
They even imprisoned him for a few years, right?
They did. And the fatal blow comes after Methodius dies in 885. A new ruler, Svatopluk, takes power, and he heavily favors the Franks.
Oh, so he just undoes all of it to secure a political alliance with the West.
Exactly. Svatopluk bans the Slavic liturgy entirely. He unleashes his soldiers, and they violently expel, imprison, or sell into slavery all of Methodius' disciples.
So the glagolitic experiment in Moravia is functionally crushed. The Latin Rite wins the day there.
Yeah, Moravia falls back into the Latin sphere, but the technology of the alphabet survives because those exiled disciples flee south.
And they cross the border into a country that desperately needs exactly what they're selling: Bulgaria.
Right. Which shifts our timeline to the late 9th century and brings us to Khan Boris I of Bulgaria.
And Boris's situation in 864 is just a masterclass in the sheer, ruthless pragmatism of these conversions.
It really is. Bulgaria was a massive military power, but it had a deep internal fracture. The ruling elite were Turkic Bulgars, but the vast majority of the peasants were Slavs.
Plus, Boris had just suffered a bunch of military defeats against Byzantium.
So he realized a polytheistic pagan state just couldn't survive. He needed Christianity to artificially fuse his divided population into one unified culture.
And to elevate his diplomatic status from a pagan Khan to a Christian prince.
Right, exactly. So he takes the plunge and gets baptized in 864.
But religion back then was deeply tied to the political power of the nobility. When Boris converts, he faces a massive, heavily armed rebellion from his pagan nobility, the boyars.
Because they knew a centralized Christian state meant the end of their traditional privileges.
And Boris handles this with terrifying efficiency. He doesn't just defeat them in battle. He systematically executes 52 entire boyar clans.
He wipes out their extended families. He basically liquidates the old pagan aristocracy so he can replace them with a new elite loyal only to him.
Which is brutal. But once he secures his throne, he has to deal with the geopolitical fallout. Because the Greek clergy pouring into Bulgaria owed their allegiance to Constantinople, not to him.
And Boris saw the danger there immediately. He demanded an autocephalous church.
Autocephalous, meaning self-headed, right? Like a totally independent church hierarchy.
Yes, a self-governing national church that doesn't answer to Constantinople. But the Byzantines balked at that.
And what's fascinating here is how Boris plays this. He reaches out to Pope Nicholas I in Rome.
Right, he does. He hints that Bulgaria might align with Western Catholicism instead. He even sends the Pope a massive list of 106 specific questions.
Yeah, I read about that. It covered everything from theology to whether his people had to stop wearing trousers. It's pure leverage.
Oh, absolutely. He's basically yelling, hey, Constantinople, Rome is offering me a better deal.
And Constantinople is terrified of losing Bulgaria to the west, so they cave. In 870, they officially grant Bulgaria its autocephalous archbishopric.
And right as he scores this victory, Boris welcomes the exiled disciples of Methodius with open arms.
He sets them up in the major literary schools.
Yeah.
And this is where the Glagolitic alphabet gets an upgrade, right?
Exactly. Glagolitic was effective, but visually it was incredibly complex, almost alien-looking.
So the Bulgarian scholars streamlined it. They wanted something closer to the prestigious Greek script, but still keeping the special Slavic characters.
They heavily incorporated standard Greek letters and only kept the unique glagolitic shapes for the sounds Greek couldn't handle, and they named it Cyrillic.
In honor of Cyril. And that implementation just sparks a cultural golden age in Bulgaria. It provides a unifying literacy that totally solidifies the state.
And over time, Cyrillic becomes the dominant lingua franca for virtually all Orthodox Slavs.
So Bulgaria brilliantly anchors itself to the Orthodox East, but on its own terms.
But, if you look at the West Slavs in the late 10th century, pulling a stunt like that just isn't an option.
Right, because if you're boxed in by the expanding Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantines are way too far away to save you.
You've got a massive German military apparatus staring you down, and they frequently use Christianizing the pagans as an excuse for outright conquest.
Which brings us to Duke Mieszko of Poland in 966. He's ruling the Polands, and the German-Ottonian Empire is pushing eastward.
Mieszko knew that if he waited for German missionaries to show up, German armies would be right behind them.
Because forced conversion would mean total political subjugation and heavy taxation. I always think of this like a hostile corporate takeover.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, Mieszko is running a vulnerable startup, and a massive conglomerate is about to forcibly acquire him. So instead, he orchestrates a friendly corporate merger through a third party.
Right. He marries the Christian Bohemian princess Dubrava.
Which is incredibly strategic. Because by accepting baptism via Bohemia, he legally bypasses direct subordination to the German Empire.
He enters the Latin Catholic fold on his own initiative, so the Germans instantly lose their religious justification for invading him.
And it lets Mieszko petition the Pope directly to set up a missionary bishopric in Poznan, which cuts the German archbishops completely out of the loop.
Exactly. For Mieszko, baptism was the ultimate diplomatic shield. It secured his borders and aligned Poland firmly with Western Christendom.
Using the Latin alphabet. Okay, so the West Slavs adopt the Latin shield to survive. But the most dramatic conversion happens back in the East.
Oh, absolutely. The transformation of Kievan Rus in the late 10th century.
Enter Prince Vladimir the Great in the 980s.
Vladimir ruled this vast, fragmented realm from Kiev. And early on, he was a fierce pagan. He even built a massive pantheon of pagan idols with Perun at the center.
But eventually he realizes paganism is an administrative dead end, right? It couldn't provide the literate bureaucracy that monotheism offered.
Right. Now, the primary chronicle tells this highly romanticized story about his conversion.
Oh yeah, the famous legend. He sends emissaries to check out different religions, and the ones who go to the Hagia Sophia say it's so beautiful they didn't know if they were in heaven or on earth.
It's a great story, but looking at how calculating these rulers were, it's mostly convenient propaganda written by Orthodox monks much later.
I mean, the real trigger was pure realpolitik.
Exactly. In 987, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II was fighting a massive civil war. He was desperate for military aid, so he reached out to Vladimir.
And Vladimir agrees to send 6,000 Viking Slav mercenaries, the Varangian Guard. But he demands an unprecedented prize.
The hand of the emperor's own sister, Anna Porphyrogenita.
Wait, Porphyrogenita, meaning she was born in the purple, like the special purple porphyry marble chamber of the imperial palace?
Yes. She was a top-tier, legitimate ruling dynasty princess, and Byzantine emperors simply did not marry them off to foreign, unbaptized warlords.
It was considered unthinkable. But Basil II was desperate enough to agree, as long as Vladimir got baptized.
But even after Vladimir sent the troops, the Byzantines tried to stall.
And Vladimir's response is just wild. He marches his army to Crimea and besieges the crucial Byzantine port city of Cherson.
He effectively took a major imperial city hostage. The message was, Send the bride or I burn your city.
The Byzantines finally relented. Vladimir was baptized in 988, married Anna, and forged this unbreakable dynastic alliance.
But here's where it gets really interesting. How he enforces this new religion back home.
Yeah, it's highly theatrical. He goes back to Kiev, ties that giant wooden statue of Perun to a horse, and drags it through the mud while his men beat it with sticks.
It's a deliberate psychological operation. He's showing the peasants, look, your god cannot even defend himself.
Then he throws the idol into the Dnieper River and orders the entire population of Kiev into the river for a mass baptism.
Under threat of enslavement or death if they refuse. It was the ultimate top-down state decree.
You can't just legislate the minds of the peasantry overnight.
No, you really can't. What actually emerged across the Rus's lands was a phenomenon called devovery, or double faith.
Right. The peasants find a way to reconcile the new state laws with their old lived reality.
The church controlled the cities, but out in the rural villages, paganism went underground. They just transferred Perun's attributes onto St. Elijah.
Because St. Elijah is depicted riding a fiery chariot across the stormy sky. If you need rain for your crops, you just pray to him like you used to pray to Perun.
Exactly. Ancient harvest festivals merged with the Christian calendar. The framework became Orthodox, but the psychological reality remained a hybridized mix for centuries.
Okay, so we've seen pragmatic rulers adopting the faith to build states. But what happened to the Slavs who simply refused?
For that, we have to look at the violent holdouts in the 12th century. The Pelagian Slavs.
These were the tribes living between the El and Oder rivers, right?
Yeah. And for them, Christianity wasn't a theological debate. They saw it as completely synonymous with German economic exploitation and cultural erasure.
They saw the exact hostile takeover Mieszko of Poland managed to avoid, and they decided to fight it to the death.
They resisted with incredible tenacity. They launched massive revolts, burned churches, and fiercely maintained their pagan identity for an astonishingly long time.
But holding out against medieval Europe only lasts so long.
Right. In 1147, the Pope officially authorized the Wendish Crusade. It was baptism or death at the hands of Saxon and Danish forces.
And it ends in absolute tragedy at Cape Arcona, doesn't it?
Yes. In 1168, the Crusaders breached their last great stronghold, the temple of the four-headed god Svetovid. They hacked the statue to pieces and burned the sanctuary,
marking the violent, definitive end of organized Slavic paganism in Europe.
It really highlights the brutal stakes of this entire era.
It does. I mean, if we pull back and look at the timeline we've just covered, it's literally the blueprint for the modern map of Europe.
From Moravia's linguistic experiment in the 860s to Bulgaria's cultural triumph,
to Poland's strategic baptism in 966, Vladimir's mass baptism in 988, and finally the fall of the Pelagians in the 12th century.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the geopolitical choices made by those early chieftains created an enduring divide
between Catholic, Latin script nations like Poland and Croatia and Orthodox, Cyrillic script nations like Russia and Bulgaria.
Exactly. And it's incredible how decisions made over 1,000 years ago still dictate the cultural spheres people belong to today.
And that brings up a really fascinating parallel for you to think about. We look back at these medieval warlords adopting alphabets as ancient history. But look at today.
Oh, like modern developing nations making choices about tech infrastructure.
Exactly. Specifically, deciding whether to build their 5G telecommunications networks using American technology or Chinese technology.
That's a great point. Just like adopting Latin or Cyrillic, choosing a tech infrastructure locks a country into an entire ecosystem of influence.
Right. It dictates security standards and diplomatic alliances for generations. So it makes you wonder, 1,000 years from now, will historians look back at our 5G network maps and see the exact same kind of cultural fault lines that Rastislav and Vladimir were drawing back in the 9th century? Something to mull over. Keep questioning the history behind the map, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.